the Ground Puck Seahawks podcast. We welcome in Curtis Crabtree from Fox 13, Tim Booth of the Seattle Times. You know what? Tired. I'm done talking to myself. I bring these two good-looking kids there to the program. It's all brought to you by Georgetown Brewery, Ground Puck Seahawks podcast. We do it every single Monday. Brought to you by Georgetown Brewery, locally owned and operated by two diehard Huskies, Manny and Roger. They've been pouring the best local craft beer for the past 23 years. Tap room is open 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. 7 days a week. Visit them at georgetownbeer.com. Boys, how are we?
Good, Puck. How's it going?
It's going good, Curtis. Tim, you look great. You look tired. Tim, every time I pick up my newspaper, it's every article is now written by Tim Booth.
Well, see, what happened was I still haven't learned about how to manage my workload, and so it's like I've just kind of like continued to ride the bike of how things were like when I was with the AP. But I think the Times is happy with that. I haven't heard complaints yet of how much I've been in your newspaper every morning, so we'll see how that continues.
No, you've been great. You've been great, Curtis. Let me start with you. Your takeaways. I read those on Fox13.com. Your takeaways from the Seahawks victory there over yesterday against Atlanta. To me, it felt like a huge youth movement.
Yeah, particularly with the defensive touchdown that they scored, the way that they did with Boye Mafe, Derek Hall, and Devin Witherspoon all combining to get him into the end zone after that sack fumble of Kirk Cousins. And DK is not even old. Ken Walker's certainly not. And so like the guys who showed up and really made something on offense too, like this is why we talked about last week that their ceiling is pretty high still, even when they were going through a 3-game losing streak, because they have some really good players on their roster and some high-end ability. It's just the fact that the way that they were playing at the line of scrimmage over the last 3 weeks had done gone such a long way towards nuking everything that they were trying to do. And yesterday they ran up against a team in Atlanta that was not capable of making them hurt like the teams they'd played the prior weeks were in quite the same way. And then when you get a few turnovers in the fourth quarter to help put the game away and make it look a little more lopsided than it probably was, that certainly helps too.
Tim, what was your takeaway from the victory yesterday?
Atlanta was the perfect get-right team for them to play for exactly the reason Curtis just pointed out. They were not the juggernauts on the offensive and defensive line that Seattle has faced in the previous few weeks. And it felt like it was the perfect opportunity for that defensive line that was finally kind of healthy again to start to get, start to put itself, kind of back together and get guys back out there after missing a chunk of time in certain cases. Byron Murphy was obviously impactful being back out in that lineup today or yesterday. So from that standpoint, it felt like a get right opportunity for the defensive line. And then the offensive line, Atlanta was one of the lowest teams in the league in pass rush, percentage or, pass rush, success rate coming into yesterday. And it showed up. Like Geno was under duress at times, but it didn't feel like he was being overwhelmed like we saw in previous weeks with the Giants and with the 49ers. In particular in those games. So it was an opportunity for that offensive line to not get overrun, to be able to give him enough time to do things in the pass game, create opportunities for Ken Walker in the run game, and maybe in the bigger picture kind of gain some confidence and gain maybe a little bit of momentum going forward that, hey, they can have a game where they're not the reason that they lost and be able to build off of that going into the next couple of weeks.
Curtis, I thought Jerrell just played his ass off.
Yeah, I think he held up fine, given it D2 player. Shout out to Central for both me and Tim there.
Did Central ever play Fenley at any time?
Yeah, surprisingly they did. Go ahead, Tim.
I can give you a full dissertation on this. The 1995 NAI National Championship game played at the Tacoma Dome, ended in a 21-21 tie. A national championship game ended in a tie. It was the last college football game that ended in a tie because the following year, the overtime rules went into effect for every level of college football. John Kitna was the quarterback. It was the game that Dennis Erickson came down because his nephew was playing for Central. He came down, he saw Kitna play, and that kind of led to him eventually signing as an undrafted free agent with the Seahawks the following year. And then obviously he ended up going to Europe before he came back and really got an opportunity in the NFL. But yes, Finley and Central tied for a national championship in 1995 in the December 14th or something like that, 1995 in the Tacoma Dome. I was there.
Okay, now Curtis, hold on. Now Tim, I'm going to be your editor over there. Who's the Paul Barrett's your editor at the Seattle Times, right?
Correct. Yes.
Okay. Hey, Paul, we need I want a further story on this one. I need like in the paper. We need like a couple of 1,000 words for this.
Okay.
That's what I need.
We're coming up on the 30-year anniversary of it, which makes me feel really old. But I would be happy to tell the story.
Everybody that played in it. Yeah, we need Kitna. Who was the head coach of Central?
Oh God, who was? It was
just everybody involved in the game.
Jeff Zenisek was the head coach, who I think is still coaching high schools somewhere in the state, actually.
Okay, we need all those people involved. I need to hear more about this game and the fact that it was the last college football game to end in a tie. God,
Greg Olson might have been the offensive coordinator at Central at that time.
No,
yeah,
the Greg Olson that was here in the Raiders.
Yes.
God, that's great. That's phenomenal. I don't even know where we left off.
Mike Jerrell.
Mike
Sorry,
Jerrell.
we got on a tangent there.
That's okay, Mike Jerrell. Curtis, he looked really good to me.
He looked perfectly fine. Yeah, they've had dumpster fire at that position, along the offensive line, several times in the past, and particularly Stone the week before, I think while he was dealing with the hand injury against the 49ers, that was a particularly rough outing for him, trying to deal with Nick Bosa all game. But yeah, he was, I think to the Ken Walker touchdown in particular, I remember, I think it was Ebikite who kind of rushed off the edge there and even got a jump on him because I think he timed the snap really well. And Jerrell was able to recover enough just to shove him further upfield as Geno was able to step around him and get that throw off to sail the pass over the top to Walker up the sideline there for the touchdown. It was a nice play, and he was the point of attack on Walker's touchdown run too. Like he seemed like he held up fine. I mean, I certainly haven't watched the coach's tape on it or tried to grind on exactly how he played all the way through, but they've had other major areas of concern, particularly at the guard spots throughout the season, and you didn't notice him like negatively significantly in that performance yesterday. I thought he held up pretty well.
Tim, can we get him to maybe grind a little bit more on Mike Jerrell and some offensive line video, please?
Look, I would expect nothing more than Curtis going over the all 22 today and making sure that we have a full breakdown of Mike Jerrell's performance on Fox 13.
That's right.
Seattle.com come tomorrow. I mean,
what else does he have to do? He's got nothing else going on, Curtis. He's got no responsibilities.
I had to watch like an Avalanche Sharks game last night. I was not watching coaches. No, I'm kidding. I was not watching coaches tape.
Well, we need coaches tape. I mean, obviously you think it's Christmas with the Christmas tree, so maybe you knocked out some early Christmas shopping.
That's been up there for like 4 years. I just like it. I'm not taking it down.
People love it. People love it in the chat. They're big fans of the Christmas tree, and that is over your right shoulder.
Unfortunately, Greg Olson was already the quarterback's coach at Idaho then by 2 years by the time that game against Finley happened. So he wasn't still at Central then, unfortunately.
And Tim, were you in high school during that?
I was a senior in high school. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's what sealed it for you. I'm going to be a Central Washington Wildcat.
No, actually, money was what sealed it for me.
Well, both things can be
true at the same time. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I just, Tim, Curtis is not as giddy as I am. The thing here's where I was impressed with Jerrell. I get that Atlanta's defense, and you said it earlier, this was the perfect team for them to get right against because of their lack of pressures, their lack of their ability to get after the quarterback. I think what impressed me about him is just with all of that, he just didn't look overwhelmed.
Yeah.
And it wasn't, and Haynes played well at times as well, but I saw a guy who looked steady and who didn't make a lot of mistakes and who wasn't getting beat badly. There was a few plays, right, Tim, that he got beat, But he didn't get beat badly on those plays in which he did get beat.
Yeah, and I thought the game plan that they came up with was really smart. I don't know what the numbers will end up being, but it felt like they used tight ends a lot more yesterday. Yeah. It felt like they had, AJ Barner and Pharaoh Brown in there and lined up on his side. And if nothing else, it's just another, a chip here or, a double team here or whatever, whatever the structure of the blocking scheme was. They did a really good job of helping him out and not putting him in a position where he's going to look, as you said, overwhelmed or uncomfortable or awkward or anything like that. He looked very steady. And that's a credit to, Ryan Grubb and Scott Huff to come up with a plan to put him out there and have him, be able to be as successful as he could be. Knowing that it was his first start, knowing the level of competition that he went against in college and, sort of the stigma that came with that of here's a guy who was just a flyer that they took who, hasn't really stood up against true competition yet. Well, now he has, and that's obviously got to be a huge confidence builder for him moving forward, and then give Seattle a little bit of comfort that, hey, okay, if Stone Forsythe can't come back, for a couple weeks and we're still waiting for Abraham Lucas to finally come off the shelf. Well, here's a guy that if we structure the blocking schemes right, can go in there and do a serviceable job for us.
Curtis, I'm sure because you study this stuff better than everyone, I'm sure you got a good note on Josh Jobe. Give me a fun factoid about Josh Jobe. You got anything on him? When I saw that he was playing yesterday, you'll be proud of me. Like, I watched the game later. I went and played golf early in the morning just because it was a nice day. And I'm like, no one's going to be on the golf course during the Seahawks game. When I saw from one of you guys saying that Jobe was going to play, I'm like, the hell is this guy? Never even heard of him. Curtis, I'm sure you got 1,000 words on Josh Jobe. Give it to me.
I don't have 1,000, but I might have 100. Him and Faion Hicks both signed on the practice squad right at the start of the regular season after cutdowns at the end of training camp. I think he played around 23-ish games for the Philadelphia Eagles over the last 2 years. So he's not completely void of NFL experience. And so he's one of those guys that kind of bounces up and down between the practice squads and the rosters of where a team's at right now. And certainly, I mean, when we were looking in training camp, cornerback was one of their deepest positions. And then for them to end up having to rely on, Josh Jobe and Faion Hicks, 7 weeks from the season was a little bit shocking with where they got to. But he played fine, there was no massive issues there at that cornerback spot yesterday. Kind of like with Jerrell, like nothing massive stood out with the way that they played. And just touching back on Jerrell really quick, he's got the tool set you want for that position for sure. Like there is like a ceiling there that seems like he can handle quite a bit at this level. So we'll need to see how he develops a little bit more. But with Jobe, like he filled in pretty nicely, kept things in front of him, didn't let anything massive happen over the top. Kind of what you need from what ultimately ends up being about your 7th string quarterback from the start of the season, jumping in and filling a role when you need it.
Yeah, he was. I just, again, like Jerrell, he just didn't seem overwhelmed. He made a nice play on the sideline. There was a sideline pass that he ended up knocking down. I thought Curtis, for the most part, well, not for the most part, for all of it. I mean, that secondary played really, really well. Without Woolen, without Brown, facing a very good passing attack with Kirk Cousins. And the fact is, what did they give up? 230 yards passing. They were really no threat in that passing game, and the rushing attack was good in the first half, but they were able to, clamp it down in the second half. But the secondary did fine with all the injuries that they had put ahead of them.
Yeah, both Jobe and Nehemiah Pritchett seemed like he held up all right on the other side too. The draft pick did a decent job in that role as well. Kobe Bryant, the safety spot, a newish role for him. He's been there for a while now, going back to last season and everything. But like even still, that's not his traditional position going back to college. And so they were pretty beat up, in some areas, particularly the secondary going into that game. And Kirk Cousins, whatever he is right now, coming off the injury he had a year ago, and the pieces that they have offensively weren't able to make them pay the way that they, the team that has some really high-end passing game might have been able to. They were able to take advantage of that and do enough to win a football game that they desperately needed to have yesterday.
Hey, Tim, when you saw them line up in their formation at the end of the half, and you're like, oh, they're going to go for it here. I mean, they're going to run one more play. What were you thinking right away? You're thinking, this is a mistake. Just get the field goal. You don't need to throw a dangerous pass like into the end zone. Thought process before that play happened.
I was thinking it was going to be your traditional 5-yard out, kind of thing to the sideline, especially if I never looked at the actual defensive alignment of the Falcons on that play, but I don't know if they were playing off and that was, kind of what they were giving Seattle in that moment for that. But that was clearly, I think, what everybody thought was, let's go. It was either going to be if they had a one-on-one situation, maybe a jump ball into the end zone to DK, or you were going to throw that quick little out, not like a skinny post in between four defenders, like into a window that's really, really tiny, and dropping it in the way that he did. I mean, that was a huge momentum swing, obviously going into the half like that. But I mean, Geno made some really good throws yesterday, and he's made some really good throws this season, which we've talked about. That one's got to be really up there on that career highlight or season highlight reel of what he's done this year, especially throwing from the pocket in that situation where it's got to be that spot on.
Curtis, I saw some, from someone today. I think maybe it was Dugar. He had like the end zone copy, and that showed it from behind, the formation, right, from Geno's perspective. I mean, my God, it was just. I mean, it's just he makes some pretty throws. Like when he's on, he can make some really just unbelievable throws that not a lot of quarterbacks can make, and that was one of them. It was just beautiful.
He is a very, very good passer of the football. Like people that are still hung up on that, this dude is a real NFL quarterback, man. And not only
breaking news. He's a real NFL quarterback.
He's pretty dang good. And not only that, but think of how he maneuvers around the pocket and creates space. We talked about that last week too. Like the dump off he had to Noah Fant was probably the other really, really impressive play in the game that got them 28 yards, set up another touchdown and everything.
Right.
But ultimately, I can't believe that Atlanta botched that circumstance the way that they did. I mean, to play a straight cover 2 there, basically there's only one thing you can do on the field, throwing it not to the sidelines, and that's deep down the middle of the field. That's because the only thing you can do is go end zone or sideline, because they had no timeouts left with 10 seconds left. And to give up that middle post like that, Jimmy Lake, what a gift for the Seahawks to call that there and let that happen to them. So, but you need to execute the play to make it happen. DK ran a really good route to get the safety in the corner to think that he was bending to the corner before breaking back to the post, and Geno delivered the ball exactly where it needed to be. He rifled that thing in there. He's got the arm strength to get it there and split everything down the middle of the field, 40 yards downfield. Yeah, it was probably the play of the game in just about every circumstance yesterday.
Hey, do we know? I mean, I know the play that DK got hurt on. I mean, they showed it on the telecast, but I think at one point they said it was his left knee, but then you see on the sideline they're working on his right knee. I mean, is it both knees? I mean, do we have any clarification on that, guys?
It was pretty clearly as the right knee that they were looking at. That was what was wrapped. That's what had the ice wrapped on it. Right. When he was carted off. So yeah, he got hit on the left leg, but it seemed like it was his right knee that sort of made the greater impact with the turf when he came down. So it looks like a bone bruise kind of thing, like just from the looks of how the knee was wrapped and kind of his reaction when you saw Calfain kind of push on the knee on the sideline. So that, there's no new update yet today on DK and how he's doing, but everyone seems fairly optimistic about it coming out of yesterday. So I would assume that that's probably like a deep contusion kind of thing and not necessarily a structural thing, but who knows? But it definitely was the right knee that it seemed like everyone was looking at yesterday.
How about well, it's good news. I mean, hopefully, I know they were optimistic coming out of the game yesterday, and then I know they're going to get some further tests coming up later today, so hopefully everything is okay. How about Ken Walker, Curtis? I mean, God, he's dealing with the flu. He comes out and he's a special back, man. I think he is probably, I don't know if you would agree with this, probably a little underappreciated in the rest of the league, just how talented of a back he is.
He is, and I think he's added the receiving part of his game, or at least improved upon that a little bit this year too. Like he's made some really good plays as a receiver this season as well. And they're not afraid of featuring him in that way either, in Ryan Grubb's offense too. So I think all that comes together. But yeah, he's got that other gear that Zach Charbonnet doesn't have, that that explosive ability that's just that another level up. And you see that with the way he's able to make some of those runs and plays that he's made, like going back to the Denver game. I think the very opener, that touchdown run, he was able to bounce out there, and that game was something not many backs can do. And I think you're starting to see that recognition a little bit more across the league for sure. But they need him to be a key part of the offense for sure. And him showing up, being able to go yesterday and giving them the performance that they did. It wasn't Jordan going for whatever he did in that playoff game. It wasn't to that level of a flu game, as Geno liked to point out back in the day. But it was plenty enough to give them enough variety into their offense to get a victory down there in Atlanta.
Do we know if he actually had the flu, or was that like
no? It's just what Geno was saying.
No. I'm talking about Jordan. Or was that like drinking and gambling?
Well, supposedly, okay. Here's my thing with that. They were staying in Park City,
right?
Okay, and supposedly they ordered pizza. What NBA? I realize nutrition and all that has changed a lot over the last 20 whatever years. What NBA player is ordering pizza from? I think it was Pizza Hut or something like that, or whatever, in Park City, Utah, the night before game. That was Game 6, right? Game 6.
No, it was
Game 5.
It was 5. He didn't have the flu when he hit the game winner, right? I think it was 5.
Okay, so Game 5 of the 98, 97 finals, whatever.
Yeah.
Like who's ordering pizza? Like I mean, yeah, in theory it could be, but I mean it's hard to mess up pizza to the point of food poisoning. Like I'm just saying,
he was drinking and gambling. That's what he was doing. Everybody knows. Come on.
But where in Utah could you do that?
I don't know. There probably some secret like speakeasy place there in Park City. I bet.
No. You know what it is? They went to Jackpot. They drove along I-80 across Utah, across the Salt Flats to Jackpot.
Okay,
where's Jackpot? Jackpot, Nevada. Jackpot, Nevada. It's right on the border of, or not Jackpot, Winnemucca. It's right on the border of Utah and Nevada. And you cross over and you can gamble. That's where they went.
God, you spoke by someone with experience.
I've not actually been there. I just happen to know Rocky Mountain region geography for some reason.
Curtis, I mean, this is probably an understatement, but I mean, how much did they obviously need that win? I mean, they're a 3-game losing streak. This thing, I mean, that's always a tough road trip to go across country like that. Atlanta was a good football team, and then obviously with the Bills on the horizon. But just how important was that win yesterday for them?
Yeah, I mean, particularly with the Bills coming in, that's a very good football team that you're going to face this next week, and if you weren't able to get that one, things could have really started to spiral on you a little bit. Despite the highest ceiling I continue to say that they have, the floor can be pretty low when their weaknesses are able to be exploited, like you've seen in a couple of the recent losses and such. So they had to get that one, and I thought that they would, just because I didn't see that team losing 4 in a row. And Atlanta's not a bad team either, but they just weren't able to press on Seattle's weak areas in quite the same way some of the prior losses would kind of hit them. So really solid all around performance from them, I thought. Jason Myers, give him a shout out for the 59-yarder he hit there. Didn't ultimately need it in the end of the day, but it's a very nice kick to make. Just about every area of the football team. Yeah, just about every area of the football team did pretty well yesterday.
Yeah, I thought, Tim, for Mike Macdonald, right? I think Mike Macdonald needed that. He needed it to kind of calm things down just a little bit, because I guarantee there's some, like, not that he pays attention to it, right? But there's whispers. Oh, is he? I don't know. Is this too big for him? Is he not ready for this yet? But I just think for him and his, mostly young staff, right? Guys not without a ton of NFL experience. I mean, there are guys there, Leslie Frazier, but not a ton of NFL experience. That I just think for him as a coach, someone new in the league, he needed it.
Yes, absolutely. You need that kind of, you need that positive reinforcement, along the way. You need that level of success to let yourself and especially your team, your players, know that the road you're trying to lead them down, what you're trying to take them to, is a path that can lead to victory or lead to success overall. So yes, absolutely, it was needed for Macdonald. It was needed for the players, and I think above anything else, yes, there were moments yesterday where they didn't look great. Like the run defense in the first half still was terrible. Like gave up 116 yards, I think it was, in the first half. But they made adjustments. They were better in the second half. And I think overall, you felt coming out of it that this was the best they've played of their game so far. Miami was kind of it had its moments, and the win in New England was nice, but you didn't feel, that's still not a very good New England team that you had to go to overtime to beat. And Denver, you were playing a rookie quarterback. You played a legit team yesterday at home on the road, and you played well in pretty much every phase of the game. So above the confidence that you get for Mike and for snapping the losing streak and getting things back on a positive track, I think you overall come out of it feeling like, okay, we played a really complete game yesterday, and this is kind of what it can look like when we do play a full complete game and the potential that this group has for it.
What was it that you saw? Did either of you see any notable differences from how Grubb called the game?
I thought he was a little bit more stubborn is the wrong word, but like he stuck with the run game more in the first half, even when it wasn't, leading to anything. I think at one point, I want to say it was like 8 runs and 11 passes or something like that. So it felt like there was a notable focus on making sure it was just a little bit more balanced, and especially not knowing what you were going to be able to get with Walker and how he was feeling yesterday. I thought it was, it kind of stood out in the first half, especially that, okay, they're giving him his carries, they're sticking with it maybe a little bit more, even though they're not necessarily getting a whole ton of results with some of those runs early on.
Curtis, anything stand out to you? Anything differently that you thought, I'll make note of that I thought Grubb changed something here and looked better there?
Nothing outwardly. I mean, I think they had to try to make sure to at least protect their rookie right tackle making there for their first start. So I think probably more from the blocking scheme aspects of having some chips and some help and some, extra protection calls on and that sort of thing. But not from like we're going to try to attack this way any different or a run pass mix perspective that was anything too out of the norm from what we've seen previously.
How did they, Curtis, let's stick with you. How did they grow this defensive performance that they had against Atlanta and then carry it over to the Buffalo game? I mean, they're seeing a vastly different quarterback, by the way, obviously.
Yeah, that's the one thing there is that Josh Allen can certainly factor into the rushing game himself, which Kirk Cousins you're not going to see out there running about doing sort of things on you in quite that way. So they're going to have to be cognizant of that now, too, going into this matchup with the Bills. That's an area where we saw what Brock Purdy was able to do on the move, not necessarily running the ball per se a week ago, but how his mobility kind of put some strain on their defense in that game against the 49ers. They were definitely better in the second half of that game yesterday against the straight-up rushing attack. Like they were much tighter in that area of the game. If they're able to at least stack some of that together and keep that going, that will help them. I don't think the Bills running back game is all that foreboding necessarily. Like I do have James Cook on my fantasy team and he does all right, but it's not like you're facing Bijan, who's much higher ceiling, kind of a talent week in, week out, going in the next week. So you just need to be sure that Josh Allen, it's going to factor into the passing attack too. When he drops back to pass, there's going to be scrambles that get out, and so that's going to affect the rushing numbers too. But they need to try to be follow up this performance at least against the typical standard schemed rushing attack that they will face next week.
And they have got a real scenario here, Tim, here in the next couple of weeks, right? Because both games are going to be at home. You get the Bills, and then you're going to get the Rams after that, and then they got to bye, and they're going to face San Francisco, and all of a sudden San Francisco, right? Again, they once again can't solve the whole Kansas City Andy Reid, conundrum for them. They're 3-4. most likely now have lost Brandon Ayuk for the season with a torn ACL. Christian McCaffrey, all likelihood, at least everything I hear from Garofalo, that it doesn't sound like he plays at all this season. He's been out and injured. Their window is shrinking with all the injuries that they have sustained. We went from last week or 2 weeks ago talking about how, oh my God, the sky is falling. They're not going to make the playoffs to do any damage to. Well, they actually, Tim, might win the division now.
If you could figure out a way over these next 2 weeks to get to the bye at 5-4, you've set yourself up pretty well.
Yeah.
Considering everything that that San Francisco's facing with their injuries and the schedule that they have coming up. Like it's not an easy stretch for the 49ers. And so you have it's kind of sound like what the Mariners were like earlier this year when they were up by 10 games and the Astros were struggling.
Sure.
You have a great opportunity here to sort of stake your claim to the division and make a team that is beat up, that is trying to figure out how to fill in all these missing pieces, make them have to catch you along the way. And so, yes, this week with Buffalo is a huge game. You could argue that the Rams game is probably a little bit more important because it's an NFC game and a divisional game moving forward. But if you can figure out, if you can split these next two and get to the bye at 5-4, I think you feel like you're in a pretty good place in the context of the division race, and then coming out of the bye and starting right away with the Niners. And hope, if you're Seattle, you're hoping that you're as healthy as you can be going into that game and not playing them on a short week when you're beat up like they did 2 weeks ago.
Curtis, so if Stone Forsythe comes back and is healthy and ready to go against the Bills, do you keep Jerrell in there?
I think I would. Yeah. I mean, if he's healthy, then you can have both active, and if you need to put Stone back in the game, so be it. But I think he played well enough to earn the opportunity to get another run. And then I don't know that George Fant, even if he does return to practice this week, is going to be ready to play given a couple days of practice heading into next weekend. So I'm not going to count on him being an option available to them just yet. But yeah, I think I'd be fine with giving him that opportunity to see how it goes. And like I said, if you need to have Stone available to rotate in there and switch things out, if his hand is feeling better enough to be able to do that, I think that would be the way I'd try to game plan going into next week.
Hey, are we hearing anything getting any closer about potentially that window opening up, Tim, for Abe Lucas?
Doesn't sound like it yet. I would say based on the timeline of how the next few weeks play out and if they are going to open that window for him, you're probably looking San Francisco at the earliest, before you would even consider rolling him out there. So, it's in some ways it's a little like when you were mentioning McCaffrey earlier. It's like until they open the window, you can't expect that he's going to be back at any time this year for the 49ers. I think the same thing goes with Abe Lucas at this point. Like until that, they keep saying, at some point this season, you'll see him. I mean, you just have to wait until they actually do something with him and open up that 21-day practice window. You can't count on anything from him. And then when they do, okay, then you can start to see if there's an opportunity to plug him in, down the road. But I mean, at this point, San Francisco is the earliest you would at all consider bringing him back.
Tim, you before we go, I'd love to get a thought or two. And Curtis Scott, I mean, you might be I know you're too young to remember him, to watch him, but I know you've crossed paths with him. Tim, you wrote about it, Seattle Times today. You and I are the same age. You remember watching Tony Ventrella. He was, I mentioned this earlier in the show, and I'm going to wrap it up with the same thing, but him and Wayne Cody and Bruce King, to me, that was the pillars of Seattle sports when I was growing up and watching, TV news and watching those guys talk about sports. He passed away yesterday at the age of 80. He wrote about it in the Seattle Times today. Please go check it out, seattletimes.com. And he just was, I don't think there's anyone, Tim, that's ever said a bad word about Tony Ventrella.
No. I mean, Tony was above anything else, Tony was the nicest guy. Like he was just a genuinely nice guy. The thing I remember about Tony was, I grew up in the central part of the state. We didn't get the Seattle TV stations until, I don't know, it was like the early 90s. They finally decided, hey, we're going to broadcast them, 100 some miles away. But in the 80s, when Tony was at his height, and when you had Wayne at Cairo and you had Bruce at Como, I knew who Tony was. Like he was that significant a figure in the sports that I followed and the teams that I cared about over here on the West side. That even though I never saw the King 5, nightly broadcast, the evening news or anything, I knew who Tony was. And that era of those three guys kind of running sports in Seattle is a little crazy to think back on, that you had those three figures that were the voices of what was going on with the teams and the athletes and the personalities that were over here at the time. Tony was kind of quirky. He was a little, he wasn't traditional as a journalist or as a broadcaster, but kind of that folksy, friendly demeanor that he had came across in his broadcasts. And then that's who he was with his personality. That's just who he was as a person. So I got to know Tony, obviously, once I started working over here more, and he was just the nicest guy. And he would just like, hey, how you doing today, Tim? And, just, that was always the way it was, just the nicest guy. So it's a very sad, day that he's not with us anymore, but it's also one of those days you look back and appreciate just the person that he was. And it's been, it kind of caught me off guard a little bit yesterday when I saw the news that he had passed, but I thought more about, those times at Seahawks and Sounders and whatever else, and just chatting with him. He was a really great man. He's a really cool man.
Curtis, you crossed paths with him when he worked at with the Seahawks. For people who don't remember, he was the first digital reporter that they had there at Seahawks.com.
Yeah. He followed Mike Kahn. Who also was in that role back in the day.
Wasn't he the first to do like the video elements of it and stuff, things like that?
I think so. I think so. Yeah. So I don't remember exactly when Tony left King 5 to go to Seahawks full time, but I had certainly not covered him, but like worked alongside him with the Seahawks there for many, many years. He was obviously their video person through the Super Bowl runs and all of that sort of thing. And I just echo what Tim said there. He was always super nice to deal with, really easy to have a conversation with. And it's certainly not something you wanted to see yesterday when you were getting up, seeing that news happened. He was, not direct neighbor, but like he lived in, Newcastle here in the same area that I kind of do. And so like, I remember seeing advertisements from Tony when he was running for city council out here and all of those sorts of things as well. So certainly gonna miss Tony for sure.
Yeah, he was great. All right. And so, who else is great? You two are great. Two Central Washington guys that have just made it. They've made it the big time. Curtis Crabtree, Fox 13, covers the Seahawks and all the sports teams there at Fox 13. Give him a follow there on Twitter at Curtis_Crabtree. Go check all of his hard work at Fox13.com. The guy is just he's a warrior. He does it all and celebrates Christmas year round, kids. Because that's what Curtis is all about. And I'm going to get Curtis to get, yesterday on the course was a nice, irons were great yesterday, Curtis, but slicing that driver, can't figure it out and really starting to piss me off.
Where were you hacking it up at yesterday, Puck?
It's the mud bog that is called Willow's Run.
Gotcha. Yes. Experience that a time or two.
Let's put a golf course
in a floodplain?
In a floodplain.
As somebody who grew up in the Snoqualmie Valley, I'm used to that out there too. So I've experienced that before.
It's a nice course, no disrespect, but God, if it rains, it's muddy.
Yes,
it is muddy there.
Yes, it is.
Not a lot of rollout with the ball yesterday. Tim Booth, of course. Tim Booth, you can read all of his work there at the Seattle Times now has made the transition from the Associated Press now to Seattle Times, seattletimes.com. Gentlemen, appreciate it. We'll talk to you next week. Thank you so much.
All right. See you, Puck.
There they are. Every Monday, it is the Ground Puck Seahawks podcast. We talk all things Seahawks football with these guys every single week. In case you missed it, first of all, it's all brought to you by Georgetown Brewery. Big thanks to Georgetown Brewery, locally owned and operated by Manny and Roger. They've been pouring the best local craft beer for the past 23 years. Tap room is open 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. 7 days a week. Visit them at georgetownbeer.com. And I'm going to tell you a little secret. In a few weeks, we've got a special surprise coming from Georgetown. Stay tuned. Stay tuned. Big news coming in a few weeks. From Georgetown Brewery that I can't wait to share with all of you. You're gonna love it. It's gonna be magnifique. In case you missed it, came in late. All of these episodes, the Ground Puck Seahawks podcast will be up on YouTube later for your viewing pleasure. Also, check it out on Apple, Spotify, wherever you find your podcast, and of course up at pucksports.com.